The smell of turpentine and oil paint always calmed me. It was the scent of creation, of bringing color to a blank canvas. Sunlight streamed through the large window of my small attic studio, illuminating the dust motes dancing in the air. Outside, the green peaks of the Vermont mountains stood silent and patient, a world away from the life I once knew. I added a final, delicate brush stroke of white to the canvas, capturing the light on a cloud. A quiet smile touched my lips. It was a feeling I hadn't known for a long time, peace. From the next room, a soft cry broke the silence. It wasn't a cry of distress, just a gentle reminder that I was needed. I put my brush down, wiping my hands on a paint-stained rag. My heart swelled. A warm, familiar tide. "Mommy's coming," I whispered. My voice softened the quiet house. "Mommy's coming, my little star." But that peaceful morning was a universe away from the storm that had brought me there. A year earlier, I was soaring at 30,000 feet, and not just in an airplane. I was flying back to New York from Chicago, my mind buzzing with victory. I had just secured the biggest contract of my budding architectural career. Our firm had landed the design for the new lakeside pavilion, and my proposal, my vision, had been the one to win them over. The city lights of Chicago glittered like scattered jewels below, but my eyes were fixed on the horizon, toward home, toward him. My hand instinctively went to my purse, my fingers brushing against a secret tucked inside. The first was a small, velvet-covered box. Inside were a pair of custom-made silver cufflinks, each one intricately engraved with the floor plan of the first apartment we ever shared. It was a silly, sentimental gift for our 5th anniversary, a testament to the life we were building. Brick by brick, blueprint by blueprint. Julian would love them. He appreciated the details, the stories behind things. That's what he always said. The second secret was smaller, made of plastic, and it held a power that could change our entire world. I had taken the test that morning in my Chicago hotel room, my hands trembling. Two pink lines had appeared almost instantly, bold and undeniable. A baby, our baby. A wave of pure, unadulterated joy had washed over me, so potent it left me breathless. For 5 years, Julian and I had been a team. We met in our final year of architecture school, two ambitious dreamers drawn together by a shared passion for creating beautiful things. He was the charismatic one, the one who could charm a client with a single smile. I was the quiet one, the one who found magic in the math, in the precise angle of a roof or the curve of a staircase. Together, we were perfect. We spoke the same language of lines and light. We dreamed of opening our own firm one day, Hayes and Vance. We dreamed of a house in the suburbs, a garden, 2 kids, and a dog named Blueprint. The plane began its descent, and the familiar, dazzling skyline of Manhattan rose to meet us. My heart hammered against my ribs. I couldn't wait to see his face. I imagined the whole scene. I'd walk in, drop my bags, and he'd wrap me in his arms, kissing me until I couldn't breathe. Then, I'd give him the cufflinks, and just when he thought the surprises were over, I would take his hand, place it on my still flat stomach, and tell him our blueprints for the future were about to become a reality. I pictured his eyes, that deep, soulful brown, widening in shock, then filling with the same joy that was making my own heart feel like it would burst. The taxi ride from JFK to our apartment in Brooklyn felt like an eternity. Every red light was a personal insult. I bounced my knee, clutching my purse to my chest. I sent him a quick text, "Just landed. Be home in 20. Have the biggest surprise for you." He didn't reply immediately, but that wasn't unusual. He was probably in a late meeting, charming another investor. Finally, the taxi pulled up to our brownstone. I paid the driver, my hands fumbling with the cash, and practically ran up the front steps, my suitcase bumping awkwardly behind me. The air was crisp with the promise of autumn, the kind of evening that always made us want to curl up on the couch together with a bottle of wine. I slid my key into the lock, turning it with a familiar click. "Honey, I'm home," I called out, my voice bright with excitement. The only answer was silence. A strange stillness hung in the air. The apartment felt cold, colder than just the evening air. I dropped my bags by the door and walked into the living room. The first thing I noticed was the bookshelf. The row of his favorite vintage sci-fi novels was gone. In its place was an empty space, a dark void. My smile faltered. My gaze swept the room. The framed photo of us in Paris, the one we took on our first anniversary, was missing from the mantelpiece. His leather armchair, the one he always sat in to read, was gone. A knot of ice began to form in my stomach. "Julian," I called again, my voice smaller this time. I walked down the short hallway to our bedroom, my heart starting to pound a frantic, ugly rhythm against my ribs. I pushed the door open. Half the closet was empty. His suits, his shirts, his shoes all gone. The top of the dresser, where he kept his watch and his cologne, was bare. It was as if he had been erased. My breath caught in my throat. This had to be a joke, a prank, a terrible, elaborate surprise that would end with him jumping out and shouting, "Got you!" But the silence in the apartment was deafening. It was the silence of absence, of finality. I walked back to the living room on unsteady legs, my mind refusing to process what my eyes were seeing. And then I saw it. Propped up against the lamp on the small table by the door was a single white envelope. My name was written on the front in his neat, architectural script. My hands shook so violently I could barely pick it up. The paper felt cold, foreign. I tore it open, my fingers clumsy. Inside was a single sheet of paper, folded neatly in half. The words were typed, clinical, impersonal. "Ellie, I'm sorry you have to find out this way. There's no easy way to say this, so I will just say it. I'm leaving. These past 5 years have been wonderful, and a part of me will always love you. You are a brilliant, wonderful woman, but love isn't always enough. I've been offered an opportunity, a chance to build the life I've always wanted, and I have to take it. I'm getting married." The words blurred. I had to read them again and again. Married. It didn't make sense. We were going to get married. We had talked about it, planned it. He was just waiting for the right moment, for a big promotion. I kept reading, my blood turning to ice. Her name is Sophia Davenport. Her father is the head of Davenport Holdings. You know what that means for my career, for our firm. This is bigger than us. Ellie, this is a merger, a dynasty. It's a life I can't turn down. She can give me things that we could only ever dream of. Sophia Davenport. The name hit me like a physical blow. I had seen her in magazines. A beautiful, impossibly elegant socialite. The heiress to a real estate empire that could build and buy entire cities. We had even laughed about her once, calling her a princess in an ivory tower. And now, Julian was leaving me for her. The letter ended with more empty words. "I hope one day you can understand. I wish you all the best. I've moved my things out to make it easier. The apartment is paid for through the end of the month. Julian." The paper slipped from my numb fingers and fluttered to the floor. My legs gave out, and I crumpled onto the cold hardwood, the sound of my own gasp echoing in the empty room. My world, so bright and full of promise just an hour before, had shattered into a million unrecognizable pieces. The cufflinks in my purse felt like a heavy, cruel joke. The pregnancy test felt like a ticking bomb. I sat there for a long time, surrounded by the ghosts of our shared life. The indentation on the couch where he always sat, the faint scent of his cologne still lingering in the air. Each detail was a fresh wave of agony. A sob tore through me, a raw, wounded sound that came from the deepest part of my soul. I wrapped my arms around my stomach. A protective, desperate gesture. Our baby. He didn't even know. He had thrown us away for money and status without a second thought. The beautiful future I had painted in my mind just hours ago was now a wasteland. I was alone, utterly and completely alone. My fingers, shaking, fumbled for my phone. I scrolled through my contacts until I found her name. There was only one person I could call. The phone rang once, twice, Before she picked up, "Ellie, you're back. Did you tell him yet? How did he?" Chloe's cheerful voice broke on the other end of the line. It was broken by the sound of my own ragged, choking sobs. "Ho, Ellie, what's wrong? What happened?" Her voice was sharp now, laced with immediate concern. I tried to form words, but all that came out was a strangled cry. "He's gone. Chloe." I finally managed to whisper, the words scraping my throat raw. "He's gone. He left a letter." I managed to choke out, the words tasting like ash in my mouth. "A goddamn letter." On the other end of the line, Chloe was silent for a beat. When she spoke again, her voice had lost all its earlier warmth, replaced by a cold fury. "That son of a bitch. That cowardly, pathetic son of a bitch. Ellie, where are you? I'm coming over." "No, don't," I whispered, shaking my head as if she could see me. "There's nothing to see. Just an empty apartment." The finality of the words sent a fresh wave of pain through me. It wasn't our apartment anymore. It was just a place I used to live. "I don't care. You shouldn't be alone right now," she insisted. Her voice was the only anchor in my spinning world. Chloe and I had been friends since our first day of college, roommates who became sisters. She had seen me through every crisis, every triumph. She had been there when I first fell for Julian. Cautiously optimistic, she had celebrated with us when we moved in together, though I always saw a flicker of reservation in her eyes that I had chosen to ignore. "What did the letter say?" she asked gently, pulling me back to the horrific present. I relayed the contents, my voice flat and robotic. Each word felt like a betrayal. Sophia Davenport, a dynasty, a life he couldn't turn down. As I spoke, the humiliation burned through the shock. He hadn't just left me. He had traded me in for a better model. I was a starter home, and he was ready to move into a mansion. A merger. Chloe spat, the disgust in her voice a bitter comfort. "He makes it sound like a business deal, because that's all it is to him. That's all he is. Ellie, a transaction in a fancy suit." I wanted to believe her. I wanted to be angry. But right now, all I felt was a hollow, cavernous emptiness. The love I had poured into him for 5 years had vanished, leaving nothing behind. My hand was still resting on my stomach. The secret inside me felt heavier now, more fragile. "Chloe, there's something else," I began, my voice trembling. The surprise I had for him. "I'm pregnant." The silence on the other end was absolute. For a moment, I thought the call had dropped. Then, I heard her sharp intake of breath. "Oh, Ellie. Oh, gone." Her voice was thick with emotion. The anger was gone, replaced by a deep, aching sympathy that made my own unshed tears well up again. "He doesn't know," I added, the statement hanging in the dead air between us. "We have to tell him," she said immediately, her practical nature taking over. "Forget him. This isn't about him anymore. This is about the baby. He has to be responsible. He owes you. He owes this child." She was right. Of course. Logically, she was right. Any sane person would agree. He had a duty, a legal and moral obligation. But as she spoke, a strange and terrible image filled my mind. Julian, standing beside his elegant, powerful fiancée, learning that his past had just shown up, pregnant and inconvenient. I saw the look on his face, not joy, not love, but annoyance. I saw Sophia's cold, calculating eyes sizing me up, seeing me not as a person, but as a problem to be managed, a scandal to be buried. My fingers, numb and clumsy, swiped open my phone. I don't know why I did it. A morbid curiosity. Perhaps a need to see the proof, to make the nightmare real. I typed his name into the search bar. It was the first result. A headline from a major New York society blog, posted less than an hour ago. "Power couple alert. Julian Hayes and Sophia Davenport announce engagement." And there was a photo. It wasn't just a photo. It was a professionally staged portrait of happiness. Julian was in a perfectly tailored tuxedo, his arm wrapped possessively around Sophia's waist. He was smiling that smileth one that had always made my knees weak, the one I thought was reserved only for me. But this smile was different. It was brighter, wider, almost predatory in its triumph. He looked like a man who had just conquered the world. And Sophia, she was breathtaking, dressed in a shimmering silver gown, a diamond necklace glittering at her throat. She leaned into him, her manicured hand resting on his chest, a massive engagement ring flashing on her finger. They looked so perfect together, powerful, untouchable, like they were sculpted from marble and money. The caption beneath the photo read, "The brilliant architect and the real estate heiress are set to wed in a lavish summer ceremony." Sources say the union will not only join two of New York's most prominent families, but will also solidify a major business partnership between Hayes's firm and the Davenport empire. A match made in Manhattan heaven. A match made in heaven. Our love, the one built on late-night study sessions, shared dreams, and whispered promises in the dark, had been cast aside for a corporate alliance. I wasn't just heartbroken. I felt erased. As I stared at their smiling faces, a wave of nausea, sharp and acidic, rose in my throat. It wasn't just the shock anymore. It was real, physical sickness. I scrambled to my feet and barely made it to the bathroom before I was violently ill. I knelt on the cold tile, shaking and sweating, my body rebelling against the poison in my soul. When the heaving stopped, I stayed there, my forehead pressed against the cool porcelain of the toilet. My breath came in ragged gasps, and in that moment of absolute degradation, something inside me shifted. The grief, the shock, the despair, they were still there, but they were joined by something new, something hard and cold and fiercely protective. I thought of my baby, our baby. No, not ours, my baby. I thought of this tiny, innocent life growing inside me, a life that deserved more than to be an inconvenient secret, a life that should never be a footnote in a business transaction. I pictured my child being introduced to Julian's new world, a world of polite, empty smiles and cold, hard ambition, a world where their own mother was a source of shame, a mistake from a past life. I saw Sophia Davenport looking at my child with disdain, a living, breathing reminder that her perfect husband wasn't so perfect after all. They would try to control it. They would use their money and their lawyers to sanitize the story. Maybe Julian would offer me a settlement, a gag order in exchange for a generous trust fund. He would try to buy my silence, buy my child's future, and mold it into something that wouldn't tarnish his new, shiny life. My child would become a pawn, a possession, another asset to be managed. No, the word was a whisper, but it echoed in the small bathroom with the force of a scream. It was a vow. I pushed myself up, my legs still trembling, and looked at my reflection in the mirror. My face was pale, my eyes red-rimmed and hollow, but there was a flicker of something in them I hadn't seen before. Not the soft, romantic glow of the woman who boarded that plane in Chicago. This was something else. It was the glint of sharpened steel. "Ellie, are you still there?" I heard a crash. Chloe's frantic voice came from the phone, which I had dropped on the floor. I picked it up, my grip steady now. "I'm here," I said, and my own voice surprised me. It was calm, eerily calm. "What was that? Are you okay?" "I'm fine," I said. "You were right, Chloe. This isn't about him anymore. It's about the baby." "Good," she said, a hint of relief in her tone. "We'll call a lawyer in the morning. We'll fight him. We'll make him." "No," I interrupted, cutting her off cleanly. "We're not going to do anything." "What are you talking about?" I took a deep breath, the cold air filling my lungs and solidifying my resolve. "He's never going to know, Chloe. He's never going to know about this baby. Ever. Ellie, that's insane. You can't do this alone. You shouldn't have to." "I have to," I said, my voice unwavering. "This is the only way. I will not let my child be a dirty little secret or a bargaining chip. I won't let them grow up in the shadow of that man and his dynasty. My baby deserves a life filled with real love, not conditional affection from a man who sold his heart for a corner office. They deserve peace, and I'm going to give it to them. The plan began to form in my mind, clear and precise as one of my own architectural designs. I had some savings, not a lot, but enough to get started. I could sell my car. I could break the lease on the apartment. I'm leaving New York, I announced, the decision settling over me with a strange sense of peace. I'm going to go somewhere he'll never think to look. Somewhere small. Somewhere quiet. I'll get a simple job. I'll raise my baby. And we will be happy. Without him. Ellie, think about this. Chloe pleaded. You're in shock. You're not thinking straight. I've never thought more clearly in my life. I replied. And I meant it. The betrayal had shattered me. But in the wreckage, I had found a new foundation to build on, my child. For the first time in 5 years, my future wasn't tied to Julian Hayes. It was entirely my own, and it was my responsibility to protect it. I walked out of the bathroom and back into the living room. The beautiful apartment, once a symbol of our shared future, now felt like a cage. Every object held a memory, a lie. I looked at the empty space on the mantelpiece where our Paris photo used to be. He had already erased me from his life. Now, I would erase him from mine. I love you, Chloe, I said, my voice soft but firm. You're the only one I'll call. But please, don't try to stop me. Don't try to find me. Just trust me. I ended the call before she could argue further. I stood in the center of the silent room, my hand resting on my belly. It was just the two of us now. A team. It wasn't the future I had dreamed of, but it was the one I had. And I would fight for it with everything I had. The girl who boarded that plane from Chicago was gone. In her place was a mother, and she was ready to build a new world. The days that followed were a blur of methodical chaos. I moved like an automaton, driven by a single, cold purpose to disappear. My grief was a vast, roaring ocean, but I couldn't afford to drown in it. Not yet. I built a wall of logistics around my heart. A fortress of checklists and phone calls. Break the lease. Sell the car. Pack the essentials. Donate the rest. Every object was a landmine of memory. The ceramic coffee mug I'd bought him for his birthday. The one that said world's okayest architect. The worn throw blanket we'd huddled under during 100 movie nights. I handled them with a cold detachment, placing them in boxes for goodwill as if they belonged to a stranger. It was a brutal amputation of my own past. Chloe called every few hours, her voice a lifeline of sanity. She didn't argue with my plan anymore. She just listened, offering quiet support, wiring me the money from the sale of my car without a single question. I promised to send her a letter, to a P.O. box she would set up. Once I was settled, it was the only way. I couldn't risk a phone call, a digital trace that could lead him to me. The last thing I did was pack my portfolio. I wrapped my blueprints, my sketches, my life's work, in heavy brown paper and pushed the large, flat case into the very back of a storage unit I'd rented under a different name. It felt like burying a part of my soul. The architect Alara Vance ceased to exist that day. In her place was just Ellie, a ghost leaving the city that held her life. I chose Vermont from a picture I'd seen years ago in a travel magazine. A photo of a small town nestled in a valley. A white church steeple rising against a backdrop of fiery autumn leaves. It looked like a place where time moved more slowly. A place where a person could breathe. I found a town called Heavenwood on a map, bought a one-way bus ticket, and never looked back. The journey north was a slow, painful shedding of my old skin. With every mile that passed, the frantic energy of New York faded, replaced by the rolling green hills of the countryside. I watched the city skyline shrink in the dirty bus window until it was nothing but a memory. I didn't cry. I felt hollowed out, scoured clean by the pain. My hand never left my stomach. A silent, constant conversation with the tiny life I was protecting. We're going to be okay, I told the baby, and myself. I will make us okay. Heavenwood was even smaller and quieter than the magazine picture had suggested. The bus dropped me off on Main Street, a single road lined with two-story brick buildings that looked like they hadn't changed in a century. A barber shop with a spinning red and white pole. A diner with a faded neon sign. A hardware store with a wooden screen door that banged shut behind a customer. The air smelled of pine needles and damp earth. It was so quiet I could hear the rustle of leaves in the wind. After the constant roar of New York, the silence was both a comfort and an accusation. I had booked a room at the town's only inn for a few nights. My savings were a finite resource, a ticking clock. I had to find a place to live and a way to make money, and fast. The first few days were a lonely haze. Morning sickness was a constant, unwelcome companion, leaving me weak and drained. I would walk the quiet streets, a stranger in a strange land, my belly aching with a mix of hunger and nausea, my heart aching with a grief so profound it felt like a physical weight. On the third day, I saw a small, hand-painted sign in the window of an old bookstore called The Story Keeper. It read, "Attic apartment for rent. Inquire within." The bookstore was a labyrinth of towering shelves, the air thick with the smell of old paper and leather. An elderly woman with a cloud of white hair and bright, bird-like eyes looked up from behind the counter. Her name was Mrs. Gable. She looked me over, her gaze lingering for a moment on my still flat stomach. But her expression held only gentle curiosity, not judgment. The attic was up a narrow, creaking flight of stairs. It was small, just one large room with a sloped ceiling, a tiny kitchenette tucked into one corner, and a bathroom the size of a closet. But it was clean, and a large dormer window looked out over Main Street, flooding the dusty space with afternoon light. It was nothing like my sleek, modern Brooklyn apartment. It was perfect. "It's not much," Mrs. Gable said, her voice raspy, "but the rent is cheap, and you get a discount on books." "I'll take it," I said, the words coming out before I had time to second-guess them. Moving in was a simple affair. I had 2 suitcases and a box of personal items. As I unpacked, the reality of my new life settled in. This small, dusty room was my home now. The 4 walls felt like they were closing in on me. The loneliness I had held at bay during my frantic escape came crashing down. That night, I curled up on the thin mattress on the floor, wrapped my arms around myself, and finally allowed myself to weep. I cried for the love I had lost, for the career I had abandoned, for the dreams that had turned to dust, and I cried for the innocent baby growing inside me, who would be born into this broken, lonely world. The weeks that followed were a monotonous cycle of survival. I spent my days battling nausea and my nights battling nightmares. My savings dwindled with alarming speed. The small nest egg that had seemed substantial in New York felt terrifyingly small here. I ate cheap food toast, crackers, soup, anything I could keep down. I knew I needed to be healthy for the baby, but the anxiety was a constant, bitter taste in my mouth. My old life felt like a movie I had once watched. Architecture, client meetings, gallery openings, it was all gone. My hands, once skilled at drafting precise lines and building models, now felt clumsy and useless. I needed to do something, anything, to stop the endless loop of grief and fear in my mind. One afternoon, I found a small shop that sold art supplies. On impulse, I used a little of my precious money to buy a cheap sketchbook and a set of charcoal pencils. Back in my attic room, I sat by the window and started to draw. I hadn't drawn for pleasure since I was a teenager, before architecture school had channeled all my creative energy into a more practical, profitable form. I didn't draw buildings. I drew the gnarled branches of the oak tree outside my window. I drew the weathered face of a man I saw sitting on a bench across the street. I sketched the way the light fell across my own hand as it rested on my stomach. The charcoal was messy, smudging under my fingers, but the feeling of creating something gave a relief. The pages of the sketchbook began to fill with the images of my new, small life. They were sad drawings, full of shadows and empty spaces, but they were honest. They were mine. The art became my confessor, the silent keeper of my sorrow. My world was my attic room, the bookstore downstairs, and the grocery store at the end of the street. But every morning, a smell would drift up to my window that was both agonizing and comforting, the rich, warm scent of freshly brewed coffee and baking bread. It came from the cafe across the street, the daily grind. Eventually, the need for human contact, for a space that wasn't my own sad little room, became too strong to ignore. One morning, feeling a rare reprieve from the nausea, I walked across the street and pushed open the door. A little bell chimed. The cafe was warm and bright, filled with the low hum of conversation. Behind the counter was a man who looked to be in his late 60s, with kind, crinkled eyes and a thick, graying mustache. He moved with a calm, unhurried efficiency, pouring coffee for one customer and handing a pastry to another, all with a gentle word for everyone. I ordered a cup of herbal tea and sat at a small table by the window, the warm mug a comfort in my cold hands. I watched him work. He seemed to know everyone who came in, asking about their kids, their jobs, their sick parents. He was the sturdy, quiet center of this small town's universe. I started going every day. It became my one small ritual. I would sit with my tea and my sketchbook, finding a strange comfort in the anonymous company. I never spoke to anyone, and no one bothered me, but the man behind the counter always gave me a small, kind nod. One day, he brought my tea over with a small gingerbread cookie on the saucer. "On the house," he said, his voice a low, pleasant rumble. "You look like you could use something sweet." I was so surprised I couldn't speak for a moment. "Thank you," I finally managed to whisper. He just smiled, his eyes crinkling at the corners, and went back to wiping down the counter. His name was Ben Carter. I learned it from hearing other people greet him. He was a widower, his wife having passed away a few years back. The cafe had been her dream, and he kept it going in her memory. One afternoon, as I was paying for my tea, my hands fumbled with my wallet, and a few coins clattered to the floor. As I bent to pick them up, a wave of dizziness washed over me, a common occurrence these days. I swayed, and a strong hand gently steadied my arm. "Ho there, easy does it," Ben said, his voice calm and concerned. He helped me straighten up. His gaze was full of an uncomplicated kindness that I hadn't encountered in a long time. It broke through my defenses. To my horror, my eyes filled with tears. "I'm sorry," I stammered, mortified. "I'm just tired." He didn't press. He just nodded, his expression full of understanding. "I've been seeing you in here every day. You're new in town." It was a statement, not a question. I nodded, unable to meet his eyes. "Yes, I just moved here." "Well, welcome to Heavenwood," he said simply. He hesitated for a moment, then seemed to make a decision. "Listen, it's none of my business, but you look like you're running on fumes, and I happen to be looking for some part-time help around here. Just a few hours a day, washing dishes, clearing tables, nothing glamorous, but the pay is fair, and you get all the tea and cookies you want." I stared at him, stunned. A job, a lifeline. It was more than I could have hoped for. The tears I'd been fighting back now spilled over, tracking silently down my cheeks. Hey, he said softly, looking alarmed. He grabbed a napkin from the dispenser and handed it to me. "It's okay. It was just an offer." "No, it's not that," I said, wiping my eyes. "It's, thank you. Yes, I'd like that very much. Thank you." The relief that flooded through me was so powerful it almost buckled my knees. It was a simple job in a small-town cafe, a universe away from the high-stakes world of New York architecture. But it was a start. It was a way to earn my own money, to build a new foundation. However small, it was a chance to stop being a ghost and become a person again. Working at the daily grind became the rhythm of my new life. The first trimester had been a gray, nauseous fog, but as I moved into the second, a fragile sense of well-being began to return. My energy came back in small bursts, and the constant sickness subsided to a dull, manageable hum. My belly began to swell, a gentle, rounding curve that was becoming impossible to hide. In the anonymity of New York, a pregnant woman was just part of the scenery. In Heavenwood, I was a curiosity. I felt the town's collective, gentle gaze on me, but no one ever asked the questions that I knew were on their minds. Who are you? Where did you come from? Where is the father? Ben, with his quiet wisdom, set the tone. He treated me with a gentle, paternal respect that discouraged gossip. He gave me tasks I could do while sitting down when my feet swelled, and made sure I ate the hearty soups he made for the lunch special, muttering about needing to feed too. He never once asked about my past or the baby's father. He simply accepted my presence, and in doing so, gave me the space I so desperately needed to heal. My days fell into a simple, comforting pattern. Mornings spent at the cafe, the scent of coffee and cinnamon a constant comfort. Afternoons in my attic room, sketching in my book as my baby quietly shifted and fluttered inside me. I was still lonely, but it was a different kind of loneliness now. It was a quieter, more contemplative state, not the sharp, jagged agony of my first weeks here. I was a ship that had found a calm harbor after a devastating storm. The cafe became my classroom for learning the town's small stories. I learned that Mrs. Gable from the bookstore had a secret passion for romance novels. I learned that Sheriff Brody came in for the same black coffee and bran muffin every morning. At precisely 7:15, I learned about births and illnesses, good harvests and bad, all through the snippets of conversation that flowed around me. For the first time since leaving New York, I felt the faint, tentative roots of community beginning to grow around me. Chloe and I maintained our careful correspondence. Every few weeks, a letter would arrive at the post office, a precious dispatch from a world that felt a million miles away. She told me about her work, about the city, always careful to avoid any mention of Julian. And I wrote back, telling her about Heavenwood, about Ben, about the slow, quiet process of rebuilding my life. I described the way the autumn leaves turned the mountains into a blaze of gold and crimson, the kindness of the people, the steady, reassuring beat of my baby's heart that I had heard for the first time at the small local clinic. I never let her know how scared I still was, how I sometimes woke in the dead of night, my heart pounding with the terrifying reality of bringing a child into the world alone. I was 6 months pregnant, my belly a proud, round globe, when my peaceful world was shattered. It was a Tuesday, a slow afternoon at the cafe. I was sitting on a stool behind the counter, polishing silverware and listening to the soft jazz playing on the radio. The bell over the door chimed, and I looked up with a practiced, welcoming smile. The smile froze on my face. My blood ran cold. It was Julian. He stood in the doorway, framed against the bright autumn light, looking utterly out of place. He was wearing a dark, impeccably tailored suit that probably cost more than my entire 6 months' rent. His hair was perfectly styled, his shoes polished to a mirror shine. He looked like he had just stepped out of a magazine. A creature of steel and glass suddenly dropped into a world of worn wood and handmade pottery. His eyes scanned the room, a flicker of impatience in his expression. They swept past me once, then snapped back, widening in disbelief. For a heart-stopping second, we just stared at each other across the small cafe. The entire world seemed to fall away, the gentle clatter of cups and conversation fading into a dull roar in my ears. I could see the confusion on his face, the shock, the dawning comprehension as his gaze dropped from my eyes to my very pregnant belly. His face, which I had once known better than my own, became a mask of cold fury. He took a step forward, his mouth opening as if to speak, but no sound came out. My entire body went rigid. The silver fork I was holding slipped from my numb fingers and clattered onto the floor, the sound unnaturally loud in the sudden silence. Ben, who had been in the back storeroom, emerged, wiping his hands on his apron. He took one look at my ashen face, then at the stranger in the expensive suit, and his expression hardened. He moved to stand beside me, a solid, protective presence. "Can I help you?" Ben's voice was low and even, but there was a hard edge to it I had never heard before. Julian ignored him. His eyes were locked on me, on my stomach. "Ellie," he said, his voice a harsh whisper. "What the hell is this? What are you doing here?" The sound of his voice, a voice that had once whispered promises of forever in my ear, now felt like a violation. I felt a surge of adrenaline, a primal, animalistic instinct to protect my child. I pushed myself off the stool, my chair scraping loudly against the floor. I placed a hand on my belly, a gesture that was both unconscious and defiant. "You need to leave," I said. My voice didn't tremble. It was as cold and steady as my resolve had been the night I left New York. "Leave." He let out a short, incredulous laugh. "I fly halfway across the country, track you down to this place, and you tell me to leave? We need to talk." His eyes darted to my stomach again, a muscle twitching in his jaw. "Is it?" He couldn't even say the words. "There's nothing to talk about," I said, my chin held high. "You gave up the right to talk to me when you left that letter." A few of the cafe's regulars, old farmers and retirees sipping their afternoon coffee, were now watching the scene with undisguised interest. The small town's silence had been broken. "Ellie, don't be ridiculous," he said, taking another step forward, his voice dropping to an urgent, commanding tone he often used in business meetings. "I deserve an explanation. You ran off. You disappeared. And now this." He gestured angrily at my belly. "You've been lying to me." The hypocrisy of his words was so staggering it almost made me laugh. "I've been lying?" I shot back, my own voice rising. "You're the one who announced his engagement to another woman, an hour after leaving me a Dear John letter. You're the one who threw away 5 years for a business deal. This isn't about that," he snapped, his composure finally cracking. Color rose in his cheeks. He was angry that I was making a scene, that I wasn't playing the part of the quiet, heartbroken girl he could easily manage. "You heard the lady," Ben said, stepping forward slightly, positioning himself between us. He was shorter than Julian, and decades older, but he stood his ground with the unshakable certainty of a mountain. "This is a private establishment. I'm asking you to leave." Julian finally looked at Ben, his eyes filled with dismissal and contempt, as if Ben were nothing more than an inconvenient piece of furniture. "This is a private matter between me and her," he said, his voice laced with arrogance. "It stopped being a private matter when you walked into my cafe and upset my employee." Ben countered, his voice dangerously quiet. "Leave. Now." Julian looked back at me, his expression a storm of conflicting emotions: anger, betrayal, and something else I couldn't quite decipher. "Possession?" He looked at me as if I were a stolen object he had finally recovered. "We're not done, Ellie," he said, his voice a low threat. He pulled a sleek, silver business card from his jacket pocket and threw it onto the counter. "I'm staying at the inn. You will call me." And then he turned and walked out, the bell over the door chiming mockingly in his wake. The cafe was utterly silent. I stood there, trembling, my hand pressed so hard against my stomach that my knuckles were white. The life I had so carefully built, my quiet sanctuary, had been breached. The monster I had run from had found me. Ben put a warm, heavy hand on my shoulder. "You all right, kid?" he asked softly. I shook my head, unable to speak. The strength that had carried me through the confrontation drained away, leaving me weak and terrified. I looked at the silver card on the counter. Julian Hayes, Vice President, Davenport Holdings. It was a declaration of war. He wasn't just Julian anymore. He was an arm of an empire, and he had come to claim what he believed was his. My quiet life in Heavenwood was over. The fight for my child had just begun. I didn't call him. The business card lay on the counter, a silver rectangle of poison. Ben eventually picked it up with 2 fingers, as if it were contaminated, and dropped it into the trash can behind the counter. The act felt more symbolic than practical. Julian wasn't a piece of trash you could simply throw away. He was a force, a storm on the horizon, and I knew he wouldn't just disappear because I ignored him. That night, I couldn't sleep. I lay in my narrow bed in the attic, my hands wrapped around my belly, feeling the baby's strong, rhythmic kicks against my palms. It was as if she could sense my fear, my turmoil, and was reminding me what I was fighting for. Every creak of the old building, every rustle of leaves outside my window, sounded like his footsteps on the stairs. I felt trapped, a hunted animal that had been cornered in its den. Why was he here? How had he found me? Had I been careless? Had Chloe let something slip? My mind raced, creating a dozen paranoid scenarios. The truth, I realized, was probably much simpler and more chilling. He had resources. He had money, power, and the kind of influence that could uncover a secret as small as a bus ticket purchase or a change of address form. To him, finding me was just a matter of logistics. The next morning, he was waiting for me outside the bookstore when I left for my shift at the cafe. He was dressed more casually this time, in expensive jeans and a dark cashmere sweater, an outfit probably chosen to make him look less intimidating. It didn't work. He looked like a wolf trying to disguise itself as a sheep. "Ellie, we need to talk," he said, blocking my path on the quiet sidewalk. "I have nothing to say to you." "Julian," I said, trying to push past him. He grabbed my arm. His grip wasn't violent, but it was firm, unyielding. It was a grip that said, "I am in control here. Don't walk away from me," he said, his voice low and intense. "I am the father of that child. I have rights." I yanked my arm free, my heart hammering. "Rights? You have no rights. You have a fiancé. You have a new life. Go live it and leave us alone." "Sophia knows," he said, and the words stopped me cold. "I told her everything after I got your friend Chloe's letter." My blood ran cold. "Chloe? What letter?" "She wrote to my office. Said you were gone. That she was worried. She asked me if I knew where you were." He explained, a bitter twist to his lips. "She didn't mention the baby. Of course. She's loyal. I'll give her that. But the letter was enough. It made me realize something wasn't right. I hired a private investigator." A private investigator. The words were so cold, so clinical. He hadn't searched for me out of love or concern. He had deployed resources. I felt sick. Chloe must have been desperate, thinking a letter was the only way to get a response from him, to make sure I was okay. She would be horrified to know what she had accidentally set in motion. "And Sophia is okay with this?" I asked, my voice dripping with disbelief. "Your perfect heiress is fine with you having a baby with your ex-girlfriend?" "It's complicated," he admitted, running a hand through his hair, a gesture of frustration I knew all too well. "The Davenports are all about legacy, about family lines. An heir, even one born outside of marriage, is significant. They see it as a complication that needs to be managed, an asset to be controlled. An asset." The word struck me like a slap. That's what my child was to them. Not a person, not a tiny, miraculous human being. An asset, a line item on a balance sheet. "So you're not here because you care," I said, the bitter truth solidifying in my mind. "You're here because they sent you. You're here to manage the complication." He had the grace to look ashamed for a moment. "I'm here because it's my child," he insisted, his voice regaining its conviction. "I'm not going to let my son or daughter grow up in a place like this, with nothing." His gaze swept over the quiet street, over my simple dress and worn-out cardigan, and the judgment in his eyes was palpable. He saw poverty. He saw a lack of ambition. He didn't see the peace, the community, the safety I had fought so hard to find. "We have everything we need," I said fiercely. "We have a home. We have people who care about us. What we don't have is a world full of lies and transactions. And I'm going to keep it that way." "You're being selfish, Ellie," he said, his tone shifting, becoming placating. "Reasonable. Think about the baby. I can give our child the best of everything. The best schools, the best doctors, a future you can't even imagine. I want to be a part of my child's life. I'll support you. You can come back to New York. I'll get you a beautiful apartment. Anything you need. You'll never have to worry about money again. It was the ultimate temptation. He was offering a golden cage, a life of ease in exchange for control. For a fleeting, desperate moment, the offer shimmered in front of me. No more worrying about rent. No more working on my swollen feet. The best for my baby. But then I saw the price tag. I would be living under his thumb, under the watchful, resentful eye of Sophia and her powerful family. My child would be raised in that cold, calculating world. They would be taught that love was conditional, that loyalty could be bought, that their own mother was a kept woman, a living reminder of a messy complication. My answer is no, I said, my voice shaking but firm. This baby is not an asset. She is not a complication, and she is not for sale. His face hardened. The mask of the reasonable negotiator fell away, revealing the ruthless businessman beneath. You think you have a choice, he said, his voice dangerously soft. I have a team of the best lawyers in New York on retainer. Do you really think you, a part-time waitress living in an attic, can fight me? I will sue for custody. I will prove you're an unfit mother. I will drag you through a court battle so ugly it will destroy you. And I will win. Is that what you want for our child? To be torn apart in a legal war? The threat hung in the air between us, ugly and real. He was right. I had nothing. No money. No resources. He could crush me without a second thought. Fear, cold and sharp, pierced through my defiance. He saw it in my eyes, and he pressed his advantage. Just think about it. Ellie, he said, his voice softening again. This doesn't have to be a fight. We can do this the easy way. For the sake of the baby. He walked away, leaving me standing on the sidewalk, trembling and breathless. The crisp autumn air felt thin, suffocating. He had laid out my options, surrender or be destroyed. I stumbled through my shift at the cafe in a daze. Ben watched me with worried eyes but didn't ask questions. He knew. The whole town, it seemed, knew. The news of the fancy stranger from the city who was the father of Ellie's baby had spread like wildfire. When I walked home, I could feel their eyes on me, their whispers following me. Their gentle curiosity had curdled into pity and suspicion. My safe harbor had been compromised. It was no longer a refuge. It was a fishbowl. That evening, I sat in my room, the darkness pressing in on me. Julian's words echoed in my head. I will win. And I knew he would. The world was built for men like him. The law, the money, the power, it was all on his side. My fierce, maternal love felt like a fragile, useless weapon against his arsenal. Despair washed over me. A dark, suffocating tide. Maybe he was right. Maybe I was being selfish. What could I offer my child compared to the world he was promising? A life of struggle? A mother constantly looking over her shoulder? I picked up my sketchbook, my hands moving automatically. I didn't draw the trees or the faces of the townspeople. I drew a bird, a small, fragile creature, trapped inside an ornate, golden cage. Its wings were outstretched, its beak open in a silent scream. As I shaded the bars of the cage, a new feeling began to bubble up through the despair. It wasn't hope. Not yet. It was rage. A deep, burning anger at the injustice of it all. How dare he? How dare he waltz back into my life after shattering it, and try to claim ownership of the one beautiful thing I had managed to build from the rubble? How dare he threaten to take my child, and turn her into a Davenport heir, a possession? The anger was a fire. It burned away the fear. It hardened my resolve. He thought he could destroy me in a courtroom? Fine. He thought he could paint me as an unfit mother? Let him try. He had underestimated me. He had left Alara Vance, the ambitious architect. He didn't know Ellie, the mother. He didn't know what I was capable of. I couldn't fight him with money or lawyers. I didn't have those weapons. But I had a story. I had the truth. And I had a voice. even if it was just charcoal on paper. An idea began to form in my mind. A wild, desperate gamble. The local community center was hosting its annual Fall Arts and Crafts Fair in 2 weeks. It was a small-town event, a collection of handmade quilts, pottery, and watercolor landscapes. It was insignificant, but it was a stage. It was a place where my story could be seen. I would not be a victim in his narrative. I would be the author of my own. I would take the pain, the betrayal, the fear, and I would turn it into art. I would draw my story, panel by panel, for the whole town to see. I wouldn't use his name. I wouldn't have to. I would tell the story of a woman, a promise, a betrayal, and the quiet fight for a new life. I would show them who I was, not through his accusations in a courtroom, but through my own truth on a canvas. It was a crazy plan. It could backfire spectacularly. It could expose me to even more judgment and gossip. But it was all I had. He wanted a war. He would get one. But I would fight it on my own terms, on my own battlefield. The next 2 weeks, I worked with a feverish intensity I hadn't felt since my final thesis in architecture school. My small attic room transformed into a full-blown art studio. I bought large sheets of illustration board and every charcoal pencil the local art supply store had in stock. Sleep became a luxury I couldn't afford. I worked late into the night, the only light coming from my desk lamp, casting long, dramatic shadows across the room. I drew until my fingers were black with charcoal dust, and my back ached from hunching over the drawing board. My baby seemed to sense the urgency, her movements inside me becoming stronger, more insistent, as if she were cheering me on. I poured every ounce of my pain, my anger, and my love onto those boards. I didn't hold back. I created a series of 12 large charcoal drawings, a silent graphic novel of my life. The first panel showed 2 young, hopeful figures, their heads closed together, drawing blueprints under a single lamp. The next showed them building a life in a city of glittering towers, their hands clasped. Then came the betrayal, a woman, alone in an empty apartment, a letter lying on the floor. I drew her on a bus, her face pale in the window, the city shrinking behind her. I drew her sick and alone in a small, empty room. As the series progressed, the tone began to shift. I drew a hand resting on a swelling belly, a single sprout pushing through cracked earth. I drew the kindness in the eyes of an old man behind a coffee counter. I drew the simple, quiet beauty of the mountains outside my window. The final panel was of a mother, her face serene, holding a newborn baby up to a sky full of stars. Her back was turned to the city skyline, which was a faint, distant smudge on the horizon. I didn't use captions or words. The images had to speak for themselves. This wasn't just my story. It was a story of any woman who had ever been broken and had to rebuild herself from the ground up. Ben was my silent co-conspirator. He saw the frantic energy in me, the dark circles under my eyes. He didn't ask what I was doing, but he started leaving a container of his hearty beef stew or a thick slice of lasagna for me on the counter at the end of my shift. For the artist, he would say with a small smile, and her assistant. He let me store the finished panels, carefully wrapped in brown paper, in the cafe's dry storeroom. Julian, true to his word, had started the legal battle. A thick envelope arrived from a prestigious Vermont law firm, delivered by a courier. It was a formal petition for a paternity test and a declaration of his intent to file for joint custody. The cold, legalistic language was designed to intimidate, to make me feel small and powerless. I read it once, then filed it away. I would deal with it later. First, I had to finish my work. He tried to approach me a few more times, once waiting outside the cafe, another time calling my name across the street. Each time, I turned and walked away without a word. My silence seemed to infuriate him more than any argument could have. He was a man used to getting a response, to controlling the narrative. I was refusing to play his game. The day of the arts fair arrived. A crisp, cold Saturday. The community center was bustling with people, the air filled with the scent of mulled cider and popcorn. I felt a knot of pure terror in my stomach. What was I doing? I was about to hang my heart, my shame, and my deepest pain on a wall for everyone to see. These people, who had offered me a quiet refuge, were about to learn the messy, ugly truth of my past. They could turn on me. They could see me as the town scandal, the troubled woman with the dramatic backstory. Ben helped me carry the panels over from the cafe. "You ready for this, kid?" he asked, his expression serious. I took a deep, shaky breath. "No, but I have to do it." We found my designated space, a bare wall between a display of handwear upon scarves and a table of rustic pottery. With trembling hands, I unwrapped the panels and hung them in sequence. Stepping back, I saw my story laid bare under the fluorescent lights of the gymnasium. It was raw, emotional, and deeply personal. It was terrifying. For the first hour, people would walk by, glance at my display, and move on. My drawings were so different from the cheerful landscapes and cozy crafts that surrounded them. They were stark, black and white, and unsettling. My heart sank. Maybe this was a huge mistake. Then, a woman stopped. She was older, with a kind, weathered face. She looked at the first panel, then the second, her brow furrowed in concentration. She moved slowly down the line, her eyes tracing the story. When she got to the end, the panel of the mother and child, she stood for a long time. She turned to me, and her eyes were glistening with tears. "That's beautiful," she whispered, her voice thick with emotion. That's a story about strength." She was the first, but not the last. Slowly, a small crowd began to gather round my display. People didn't just glance. They stopped and looked. They pointed. They whispered to each other. I saw expressions of sympathy, of anger, of recognition on their faces. I heard murmurs of that poor girl and who would do something like that. They weren't just seeing my story. They were seeing their own stories reflected in histories of loss, of resilience, of starting over. I wasn't an outcast. I was one of them. Then, I saw him. Julian was standing at the back of the crowd, his face pale with shock and fury. He pushed his way through the people until he was standing directly in front of me. His eyes were blazing. "What is this?" he hissed, his voice a low, vicious snarl so only I could hear. "What the hell do you think you're doing? Trying to humiliate me? Trying to turn the whole town against me?" "I'm telling my story," I said, my voice quiet but steady. I was surprised to find that I wasn't afraid of him anymore. Here, on my own territory, surrounded by my truth, his power seemed to diminish. "You wanted a public battle, Julian. This is it. But it's not happening in a courtroom where your lawyers can twist the truth. It's happening here. This is pathetic. Ellie." He spat, his eyes darting around at the watching faces. "You think these drawings will mean anything to a judge? I don't care about a judge," I said. "I care about my daughter knowing that her mother was not a victim, that she fought for her. And I care about living in a place where I am not defined by your lies." His face was a mask of rage. He was losing control, and he knew it. He had come to this town to isolate me, to intimidate me into submission. Instead, I had taken my story and woven it into the fabric of the community. I had turned his weapons of shame and secrecy against him. Suddenly, a wave of dizziness washed over me, and a sharp, breathtaking pain shot through my lower back. I gasped, my hand flying to my belly, which had suddenly tightened into a hard, rigid knot. "Ellie." Julian's angry expression was instantly replaced with one of alarm. "What's wrong?" Another contraction hit, harder this time. It stole my breath, making me cry out. The pain was immense, terrifying. It was too soon. I was only 34 weeks pregnant. The small crowd around us gasped, their murmurs turning to expressions of concern. Ben was at my side in an instant. "What is it, kid? Is it the baby?" "I think so," I gasped, leaning heavily against him. "It's too early." Panic erupted. Someone was calling for an ambulance. The noise of the gymnasium, the concerned faces, Julian's panicked expression, it all started to swim before my eyes. As the chaos swirled around me, a sudden, fierce gust of wind rattled the windows of the community center. The lights flickered and went out, plunging the room into semi-darkness, illuminated only by the emergency exit signs. Outside, the sky had turned a dark, bruised purple. The first flakes of a sudden, violent snowstorm began to lash against the glass. The predicted winter storm had arrived early, and with a vengeance. Another contraction seized me, more powerful than the last. I cried out, my knees buckling. Ben and another man helped me to the floor. Through a haze of pain, I saw Julian, his face a ghostly white in the dim light. He looked utterly helpless, frozen, the powerful man from the city rendered useless by a force of nature and the raw, undeniable reality of childbirth. The ambulance wouldn't make it through this blizzard. The hospital was 30 miles away. We were trapped. My baby was coming, here and now, in the middle of a storm, with the man who had broken my world watching, powerless to do anything but witness the consequences of his actions. The community center gymnasium, moments before a place of cheerful, small-town commerce, descended into a state of organized chaos. The storm raged outside, a howling, white fury that sealed us off from the rest of the world. Emergency lights cast an eerie, clinical glow over the scene. The handwear upon scarves and rustic pottery were forgotten. My labor, sudden and terrifyingly real, had become the center of everyone's universe. Pain was my entire world now. It came in relentless, crushing waves, each one more powerful than the last. In the brief lulls between contractions, I was vaguely aware of the townspeople rallying around me. Someone brought a pile of unsold quilts to make a makeshift bed on the floor. A woman named Mary, a retired nurse I'd seen at the cafe, knelt beside me, her hands calm and steady as she took my pulse. Her voice was a soothing anchor in the storm of agony. "Just breathe, dear," she said, her tone firm but kind. "In through your nose, out through your mouth. That's it. You're doing just fine." Ben was on my other side, his face etched with worry. He held my hand, his grip solid and reassuring. He kept murmuring words of encouragement, his voice a low rumble against the howl of the wind. "You're strong, Ellie. You can do this. We're all here for you." And then there was Julian. He stood a few feet away, a ghost at the edge of the circle of light. He was useless, a spectator to the raw, primal event unfolding before him. The arrogance, the anger, the carefully constructed controlate had all been stripped away. In its place was a raw, naked fear I had never seen on his face before. He looked like a man watching the world end. This wasn't a business deal he could negotiate or a legal battle he could win. This was life, messy and brutal and utterly outside of his command. I saw Chloe arrive, a snow-dusted angel of fury. She must have driven up from New York for the arts fair, a surprise visit to support me. She pushed her way through the onlookers, her eyes finding mine. Relief washed over me at the sight of her fiercely loyal face. She dropped to her knees beside me, taking my other hand. "I'm here, Ellie," she said, her voice shaking slightly. "I'm here. You're not alone." She shot a look of pure venom at Julian. "What is he doing here?" she snarled. "No time for that," Mary the nurse said briskly, not looking up. "The baby's coming, and she's coming fast." The world narrowed to a tunnel of sensation. The voices around me became a distant murmur. The only reality was the tide of pain, pulling me under, then releasing me, only to crash down again. I cried out, a sound that was not entirely my own, torn from some deep, animal place inside me. During a moment of clarity, my eyes locked with Julian's. I saw the full weight of his actions crashing down on him in that instant. He saw the pain he had caused, not the abstract, emotional pain he could dismiss, but this real, physical, life and death agony. He saw the child he had abandoned being born into a world of struggle and uncertainty. Because of his choices, he took a hesitant step forward, as if to help, then stopped, knowing he had no right. Push, Ellie. Mary's voice cut through the fog. On the next contraction. You need to push. I bore down with everything I had. A scream tearing from my throat. It was the hardest thing I had ever done. It was an act of pure will. Of love. Of sheer, desperate force. Chloe was whispering in my ear. You've got this. You're a warrior. You're so strong. Over and over again. A mantra of support. And then, after an eternity of effort, there was a sudden release. A final, wrenching surge. A new sound filled the cavernous room, cutting through the wail of the wind. It was a cry. A tiny, furious, beautiful cry. My baby was here. Mary skillfully wrapped the tiny, squirming infant in a clean quilt and laid her on my chest. I looked down, my body trembling with exhaustion and adrenaline. She was so small, so perfect. A dusting of dark hair, a scrunched up, angry red face. She was the most beautiful thing I had ever seen. Tears streamed down my face, not of pain or sorrow, but of a love so immense, so overwhelming. It felt like my heart would burst. Hello, I whispered, my voice choked with emotion. Hello, my little star. I decided on her name in that instant. Stella. The gymnasium was silent, save for Stella's cries and my own ragged sobs. Everyone was watching, their faces a mixture of awe and relief. It was a moment of pure, unscripted magic. A new life had entered the world. Right here, among the quilts and pottery, in the middle of a blizzard. I looked up, and my eyes met Julian's again. He was crying. Silent tears traced paths down his pale cheeks. He looked utterly broken. The walls he had built around himself had finally crumbled, and all that was left was the raw, undeniable truth of what he had lost. He had just witnessed a miracle, the birth of his own daughter, and he was nothing more than a stranger in the room. He had no part in it. He had traded this moment, this profound, life-altering love, for an office with a view, and the full, devastating weight of that bargain was written on his face. The storm began to subside in the early hours of the morning. A snowplow finally cleared the road to the community center, and an ambulance, its lights flashing silently in the blue pre-dawn light, was waiting. The paramedics checked me and Stella over. She was small, being premature, but she was healthy, a fighter. As they loaded us into the ambulance for the trip to the hospital, Julian approached. He looked haggard, his expensive sweater rumpled, his face stubbled. He looked like a man who had been through a war. Ellie, he said, his voice hoarse. Is she okay? She's perfect, I said, my voice soft but cold. I held Stella closer to me, a shield of maternal love. Can I? He reached a hesitant hand out, as if to touch her, then let it drop. What's her name? Stella, I said. He repeated the name, his voice barely a whisper. Stella. He looked at me, his eyes pleading. Ellie, I am so sorry. I was a fool, a coward. I never knew. His voice broke. I looked at his face, at the genuine anguish there. A part of me, the part that had loved him for 5 years, felt a flicker of pity, but it was quickly extinguished by the fierce, protective love for the tiny person in my arms. His apology was too little, too late. The damage was done. The trust was shattered beyond repair. It doesn't matter what you know now. Julian, I said, my voice weary but firm. You made your choice a long time ago. Now, Stella and I are going to make ours. The paramedics closed the ambulance doors, shutting him out. As the vehicle pulled away, I saw him standing alone in the snow-covered parking lot, a solitary figure under the pale morning sky, watching his daughter leave before he ever had the chance to hold her. The war wasn't over. I knew that. There would still be legal papers and difficult conversations. But I also knew, with a certainty that settled deep in my bones, that the battle had been won. He hadn't destroyed me. He had, in his own terrible way, made me invincible. I had faced the storm, and I had brought my own star into the world. The next few days in the small Heavenwood hospital were a quiet, peaceful bubble. Stella was tiny, but she was a miracle of resilience. She thrived. She had my dark hair and a fierce, determined little frown that, to my dismay, was all Julian. Holding her, feeding her, watching the steady rise and fall of her chest as she slept, it was a love so profound, so all-encompassing, that it recalibrated my entire universe. The jagged edges of my heartbreak began to smooth over, replaced by this new, immense purpose. My world, which had once felt so empty, was now completely full. The town of Heavenwood wrapped its arms around us. A stream of visitors came to my hospital room, bearing not gossip or judgment, but gifts. Ben brought a huge, fluffy teddy bear and a thermos of his best chicken soup. Mary, the retired nurse, brought a stack of expertly wear-upon baby blankets. Mrs. Gable from the bookstore came with a collection of classic children's books. They didn't talk about Julian. They didn't talk about the drama at the community center. They just cooed over Stella, told me I was a hero, and welcomed my daughter as one of their own. They had seen my story on the wall, and they had chosen a side. They had chosen mine. Julian didn't come to the hospital. Instead, a local lawyer, a woman with a kind face and gentle eyes named Sarah, came to see me on my last day there. She explained that Julian had hired her on my behalf. "He wants you to know he's dropping the custody suit," she said, her voice soft. "He's not going to fight you." I was stunned into silence. I had been bracing myself for a long, ugly war, preparing for the next volley of legal threats. Surrender was the last thing I expected. "He has, however, set up a trust fund for Stella," Sarah continued, sliding a folder across the bedside table. "It's substantial. It will cover all of her expense education, health care, everything through college and beyond. It is entirely in her name, and you will be the sole administrator. There are no strings attached. He has waived all rights to decision-making." I stared at the folder, at the neat, typed pages detailing a sum of money so large it seemed unreal. It was a king's ransom. It was freedom from worry. It was everything he had threatened me with and everything he had tried to bribe me with. But the terms were different now. This wasn't a golden cage. It was a gift, an apology, an act of penance. "He's also leaving," Sarah added. "He's checked out of the inn. He asked me to give you this." She handed me a simple, sealed white envelope. His name wasn't on it. Mine was. After she left, I sat for a long time, Stella sleeping peacefully in the bassinet beside me. I looked at the letter, my heart a confusing mix of emotions. A part of me wanted to tear it up, to throw it away unread. But another part, a quieter, more weary part, needed to know what it said. I needed closure. With trembling fingers, I opened it. The letter was handwritten this time, his familiar script looking shaky, uncertain. "Ellie, there are no words to properly say what I need to say. Sorry is a pathetic, useless word for what I did to you. I didn't just break your heart. I tried to break your spirit. I was a coward, and I was a fool. I was so blinded by ambition, by the life I thought I was supposed to want, that I threw away the only real thing I ever had. Watching Stella be born, watching you, in all that pain and chaos, you were the strongest person I have ever seen. You were a force of nature, and I realized in that moment that I had everything wrong. I thought success was about buildings and money and power. I was wrong. Success is what you have. It's strength. It's courage. It's the community that rallied around you. It's the love that filled that room. I don't deserve to be a father to Stella. Not now. Maybe not ever. A child deserves a father who is present, who is brave, who puts them first. I am none of those things. I would only bring the toxicity of my world into hers. And I won't do that. You were right to run from me. You were right to protect her from me. The money is not an attempt to buy you or to control you. It's the only useful thing I can offer. It's a tool. Use it to give her the life she deserves. A life of peace and security, far away from me and my world. It's the only way I can be a father to her right now, be staying away. I am going back to New York to face the mess I've made. I don't know what will happen with Sophia or the company. Frankly, I don't care anymore. Seeing Stella born changed everything. It showed me how empty my life really is. Maybe one day, when she's old enough, you can tell her about me. Tell her the truth. Tell her her father was a weak man who made a terrible mistake. And maybe you can give her the letters I will write. I will send them to the lawyer. You don't ever have to read them. But I hope one day Stella will want to. I wish you a lifetime of the peace you have found here. You deserve it. Julian. I folded the letter, tears blurring my vision. It wasn't a magic wand. It didn't erase the pain or the betrayal. But it was something. It was an admission. It was an abdication. He was finally letting us go. The ghost that had haunted me for so long was finally receding. I looked at my daughter, my perfect, beautiful Stella, and I felt a profound sense of peace. The storm was over. 1 year later, the sunlight streamed through the large window of my attic studio. It wasn't the same attic. After a few months, with the financial freedom the trust fund provided, I had bought a small house on the edge of town. It was a fixer-upper, a charming little cottage with a big garden and a converted attic that was perfect for a studio. I spent my days renovating it. My hands, once used to designing skyscrapers, now learning the simple, satisfying work of sanding floors and painting walls. I was building a home, not just a house. My art had taken off in a way I never expected. The story of the arts fair, of the birth in the blizzard, had become a local legend. A journalist from a regional Vermont magazine heard about it and wrote a feature on Meth City architect who became a small-town artist. The article focused on the power of my charcoal drawings, my visual storytelling. Galleries from Burlington and even Boston started to call. I had my first solo show a month ago. It sold out on the opening night. I was making my own living, on my own terms, through my own truth. I put my paintbrush down. The smell of turpentine, a familiar comfort, from the nursery next door. I heard Stella stir and make a soft, happy gurgle. I walked in to find her standing up in her crib, bouncing on her sturdy little legs, a wide, gummy smile on her face when she saw me. I scooped her into my arms, burying my face in her soft, sweet-smelling hair. "Hello, my little star," I whispered. Later that afternoon, a package arrived. It was from Sarah, the lawyer. Inside was a small, beautifully carved wooden box, and inside the box was a stack of letters, tied with a simple ribbon. Julian's letters to Stella. I hadn't read any of them. I didn't need to. They were for her. When she was ready. Tucked beside the letters was the latest issue of an architectural magazine. Sarah sometimes sent them, thinking I might be interested. I put Stella down on her playmat and idly flipped through the magazine. And then I saw it. A 2-page spread. Julian Hayes, building a new foundation. The article detailed his very public and very messy split from both Sophia Davenport and her father's company. He had given up his partnership, his fortune, everything. He had started his own small firm, one that specialized in designing affordable, sustainable housing and community centers. The article quoted him, "I spent the first half of my career trying to build monuments to myself." He said, "I've realized now that the only structures worth building are the ones that serve a community, the ones that offer people shelter and hope." There was a picture of him, standing on a construction site. He looked different. The polished, arrogant veneer was gone. He looked older, more tired, but his eyes held a quiet purpose I had never seen before. He was building a new life from the rubble of his old one, just as I had. I looked at the magazine, then at my daughter, happily chewing on a wooden block. Our paths had diverged so violently, yet in a strange way, we had both found a path to redemption. He was trying to build a better world over there, and I was building my whole world right here. In this sun-drenched room, there was no anger left in my heart, no bitterness, just a quiet, settled peace. The wounds had healed, leaving behind scars that told a story of survival, of strength, and of a love that was strong enough to build a new world, one beautiful, starlit piece at a time.